Opening slide graphic text. Enhancing learning and skill development. Title, Session 2, Knowing the Learner, with Milton Tyree. Logos, Belonging Matters, talksthatmatter.net.
5 things to know about teaching. So we're going to dig into these 5 things for the rest of our time that we covered really quickly at the beginning. Teaching involves a balanced relationship and devoting time to know the learner. You know, we all benefit from balanced and reciprocal relationships. And likewise, we have all benefited from somebody believing in us, perhaps especially when we didn't believe in ourselves. And so I'm just thinking back of what, you know, Joe Mazzarelli's image of a friendly guide in a foreign culture. This is a picture of a couple really terrific men. I know the man on the left's name is Keith, and he owns a body shop in Independence, Kentucky. And the man on the right is Sam, who is a man who got a customized job working for Keith. And one of the things that really made this job work well for Sam was this balanced relationship. So I guess I'm thinking about this in a couple of ways. One is those of us as parents and as support workers having a balanced relationship, kind of a non-controlling relationship where we're teaching things. But the other is to look for the same thing in the people who will be teaching. As I was mentioned earlier, you know, you're deciding who's going to be teaching. We're going to dig into that next time. But this idea about what characteristics of that person are we looking for? One of the things that I thought of with Keith and Sam, because I got to assist Sam to get this job. And when I was talking with Keith before they'd ever met, you know, I thought, man, these guys have a lot in common in terms of Keith was telling me he was in vocational school. You know, he said, boy, when I got into body work, I was really good at it. And people had always told me I couldn't do anything. And I thought, well, that's a lot like what's happened to Sam. You know, people have always on Sam, you're goofing off all the time. You can't do anything, you know. Anyhow, you know, one of the principles, one of the themes in SRV theory is interpersonal identification, where people see themselves in another person and they will want good things for that person. And they say good things about that person, and they can see themselves in that person and can see themselves in them and all of that. And I thought, boy, that was really true here. And it was one of the things that made the work. I remember one time Sam was, you know, because I was there, I didn't teach Sam the job, but I was around checking in to see how it was going. And one of the days I was there, Sam was really struggling with a bumper he was working on. And he said, I just want to please Keith, you know? And, you know, they both really admired each other. So this relationship part, you see, is just really important around learning. Another item here that we had was getting to know people and people getting to know themselves. This really relates to one of the comments people made around interest, people learning interesting tasks. We're going to talk about task and reinforcement and all of that next Friday, but it really fits here too, like getting at the core of what would be interesting to people and motivating to people. You know, one of the other things that Mark said that is just ingrained in my mind is teach people something they want to learn, and the motivation is built in. We don't need all that extra stuff. So just a little bit about discovery here. It's a common sense practice that involves getting to know people and helping people get to know themselves before plans are made. Spending time with people instead of evaluating or testing them. And here's how we break this down. Learning about people's interests. Now I have here related to work, but it could be or other aspects of life in addition to work. Conditions that need to be in place for will be at their best? And what do they have to contribute? And this is so important because, I look back at these, also one of the other comments was all the professionals who have these, really limiting expectations, which could be because of their professional training. I mean, a lot of what I learned at the university was focused on this deficit column, focusing on how people are different rather than what we want to do in discovery and our relationship with people, finding out what people have in common with others. A thorough description of what people can't do. Boy, did I learn a lot about testing to find out what people can't do when I was in the university, instead of appreciating what people do and what they have to contribute and offer. And then what kind of diagnosis do people have and how do we stamp that on people rather than imagining what might be possible if people are well supported. So this idea of discovery at Mark Gold & Associates, we like this iceberg analogy. This is so often what is known about people, just the tip of the iceberg. Like you see the person, you make some kind of decision. It's kind of like the wound. Dr. Wolfensberger talked about the wound of disability being life-defining. You just see somebody has Down syndrome and then you decide where they should live and who they should work with, and all that kind of thing. But so what often decisions are made with this information that just what discovery does is it lets us know that there's so much more to know. And so just discovering possibilities previously not considered is really what discovery is about. And the first thing we need to learn about is conditions. And these are some examples of conditions. Like what's the nature of the task or activities that if they're doing that, it's working well for them. So some of this we'll get into later has to do with just the very nature of the task itself. Does it have a range of correctness, or is it pretty clear when the task is done? Just the setting and environmental features, people and social situations, like who are the people? It's just so important. The age of people, the temperaments of the other people, the commonality of other people, and all of that makes a big difference. Conditions of things working well. So you see, the point here is this relates to deciding what what needs to be learned, not necessarily what you are going to be teaching, but what needs to be learned. What kinds of, some people do really well with just showing up and exactly what's going to happen, or as much as you can tell, it's like a certain pattern of how things are happening. And some people don't really need that much at all. Certainly not what my life looks like. Every day is different, and that's just fine with me. Thank you very much. But some people it's not. So it's important to know that. Just timings, pace, scheduling, all of that. A lot of times, people who have intellectual or developmental disabilities doing things real quickly in their thing, but maybe they're really good at doing things precisely. Or, and so this kind of goes back to the nature of task too, but just like, what is the pace, the timing, the predictability to the scheduling of stuff? What does all that look like? What kinds of support strategies, approaches, and other kinds of, stuff like that is needed. And then we look at people's interests. And you can't simply rely on asking people what they want to do, because a lot of times people won't have a vision of really what that is. So one of the things we look at for interest, this is what Mark called intrinsic interest. What kinds of things do people do on their own without being asked? And so this relates to a lot to what people would be motivated, interested in learning. And especially this last point is an SRV point, where especially that are typical for people's age, gender, and culture that are most highly valued, and things to lift people up and raise expectations. And sometimes when we ask people, I've seen this happen. We ask people even, well, what's interesting to you? What do you really like? It's not a bad question to ask people, but people may say something and they're opening themselves up. They're saying, I'd really like to be a doctor. And then somebody might say, well, that's unrealistic. And you shut the person down when you've asked them to open up, So Now, we wouldn't want to say, oh, okay, I'll help you be a doctor. But I think what we could say, I mean, if that wouldn't be something that really is going to be feasible for the person, what we could say is, that's really interesting. I'd like to learn more about what you like about the idea of being a doctor. I mean, like, I wonder what's behind that. It might be, it might not be 8 years of medical school. It might be just the status of a doctor. It might be that the person has a lot of doctors in the family and they admire those people and they like to be like them. It might be wearing scrubs. Could be all kinds of things. It might be that if somebody had a really good job in a lab, that was a fit or something like that, it would, around medical research or something, that would satisfy that doctor urge very nicely. So to explore what it is that people tell you they're interested in, like what is underneath all of that, and what else, how could that be expressed, and what could it look like for people? Interest is so important. And a lot of times people's interests has a really nice connection with things that they're contributing, and their contribution, which is the next point we're going to look at. And sometimes it requires translation. Like you see somebody who has an interest in a certain kind of area, and that could translate to something else that would be really marketable. So one of my favorite examples is a woman I was mentoring in discovery related to work. And this man she was mentoring was just really good at those claw machines, like you have in arcades and all, and you work the levers or buttons and you have this claw go down and it picks up something, and anyhow, you put your change in and usually you don't get anything, but he had this real talent with it. So she was thinking about, well, how can that translate? And she was thinking, well, gosh, that kind of eye-hand coordination and all, maybe operating robots or maybe operating drones or something like that. So to think about what people are interested in and good at doing, and how could that translate to other kinds of, affiliations or, work or other than work kinds of things. And then the last area is contributions. And this has a lot of different layers to it. Now, skills is something, sure enough, that we need to pay attention to. What kind of skills do people have? Like the guy who's, at the claw machine, that's a skill. So how can that be translated? What kinds of skills do people have? But it's also their personality. I'm going to show you an example of a man later on today who just had, gosh, I mean, like, his personality was actually his major contribution. I helped him get a job at the Board of Education where I used to teach special ed. And boy, did that Board of Education need him to soften them up a bit, and to get people talking to each other. And he did that. Daggone it. Anyhow, credentials, what kind of credentials have people earned, and what kinds of life experiences have they had, and how can that contribute to where they are and what they're doing, and what kinds of recommendations, who do people know who could recommend them, what kind of resources do they have that could help, what kind of very specific kinds of knowledge or things do they care about or know about. I remember that, this one guy I was assisting with work once, he knew every genus and species of every invasive plant. We drive them by, and we have a lot of those in Kentucky. They were just fascinating to me, that he knew all of that. So, I mean, where would that knowledge be appreciated? Who else is really interested in that? People who just have a really strong passion in life for something, so how can that relate to the kinds of tasks that people are learning? And so this is just a graphic illustration of what we're hoping to see come out of discovery, that we have an idea what needs to be in place for people to be at their best. What are the tasks? Who are the people? What's the environment like? All of that. What kind of lighting? Is that hot or cold? I mean, all of that stuff. You want to think about that, in terms of, I've done a lot of my work in work, but I've also done a lot of my work in people getting affiliated in faith communities. So what is the culture of the congregation? who are the people who go, what's important to them in terms of mission or whatever, and how could that, so it's not just showing up, like not showing up at an arbitrary job. You're not just showing up at an arbitrary Presbyterian church. It's like, what is the person's faith tradition? What's the style of worship? What's the size of the congregation? Who are the other people who go there? All that kind of stuff. That's conditioned stuff, you see. Same thing with working out. I haven't been to a gym since COVID, but I used to go to Planet Fitness, which is this really cheap gym where people go just to get some exercise, not a bodybuilding kind of place, So that would have to do with some of the conditions of a gym, you see, that are important to me. Anyhow, that's the kind of stuff to be thinking about. And how does it relate to people's interests and things that they have to contribute? And then we're looking for this sweet spot as much as possible, how all of these kinds of things intersect. And this is a little SRV reminder up in the top, searching for the most valued of options within the range of options, and always in discovery, like an SRV, imagining what could be, not just what is readily available or currently in place. I really like this graphic around the idea of discovery. You have this is kind of a MC Escher kind of a drawing, an optical illusion. You've got the guy over on the right saying there's 3, and the guy on the right saying no, there's 4. It depends on what angle you're looking at. But when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And of course, we're not talking about things here, we're talking about people. But the same thing is true for people, isn't it? You can have, it's like that comment about expectations. I mean, people will very often rise to the occasion that are being placed on them, which relates a lot to relationship, what we're talking about here. Now, I'm going to show you one final kind of thing around discovery. And this is from a colleague of mine, Siva Schumpert. She's another associates and one of the older gray ones like I am. Anyhow, one of the things that I do at Mark Golden Associates is I go see other people teach systematic construction, and I go watch other people teach discovery and customized job development. I learn so much. I kind of know the book, but I learn a lot from watching other people teach it. And so I went to one of Siva's discovery workshops, and she made this comment just as a offhand kind of comment. And I wrote it down. I thought, man, is that important? She said, the people you see every day can be the hardest people to get to know. And I thought, man, oh man, is that one of the hardest things in discovery? Because if you're covering things with somebody that you already know pretty well, it's pretty hard to look past your former assumptions, isn't it? It just is. And so I get to mentor a lot of people in discovery around work. And if they know their learning partner, the person, the 3 of us are going to be working together on this process of discovery, I say, if you know this person, I always tell them this, boy, oh boy, you've got your work cut out for you, because you've got to think about all of these assumptions that you have about this person and how to look past them or look beyond them or think that there's probably more than what I've assumed, even if you're going in with positive expectations. All right, so that's just a snapshot of discovery.
Closing slide graphic text, with thanks to Milton Tyree. Produced by Belonging Matters. Belonging Matters makes every effort to provide accurate and up-to-date material. However, information is subject to change, and our material is for reference only. This video was produced on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. This video was made possible with the support of an information and capacity building grant through the Department of Social Services. Logos, Belonging Matters, talksthatmatter.net.